Here we are again, guys, on another episode of Rotten Reviews. On this episode, I take a look at 2011's film The Darkest Hour. It has a 12% on the tomato meter and a big 25% on the audience score. There are 29,633 audience reviews to make that big whopping 25% on the audience score, making this certainly rotten, and I'll agree. My own opinion is that this film is rotten, but it's still enjoyable the first time, the very first watch. If you don't put too much thought into it, you can get some enjoyment out of it. It's a little bit weirder than other films. It's got an unusual setting in that it takes place in and around metropolitan Moscow, Russia. I'm not saying that the film is completely shot there, but a lot of the footage is there to convince you that this is in fact in the middle of Moscow. You'll recognize the landmarks. So we have quite a lot of issues with this film. I'm going to be getting into some of those. I've got a nice little list to talk about, but let's get right into the audience reviews and find out why this is particularly rotten at this time. And this first review is going to be from October 6th of 2019, making it about 2 months ago, 2 months and an odd number of days. 3.5 stars. I thought it was great. Ignore the grumpy detractors. Exciting, good acting, and it was a blast. Well, I'll say if I had to give this a number of stars, I'll give it 1.5, perhaps peaking at 2 stars, meaning that you can sit through this you can sit through this from beginning to end without getting bored enough to shut it off. It's worth watching just one time. Maybe crack open a beer and watch it. It might make it go down a little bit easier. It's certainly no 3-star movie. It's not 2.5 stars. It peaks out at a solid 2 stars, and I think the main reason I give it that is because it's just got a lot of logical fails. It's got a lot of stuff that's you can kind of overlook it because it flies past you real quick, but there are quite a number of plot holes or narrative discontinuities in this. Beyond just nitpicking it, you watch this a second time and they're going to pop out at you left and right, but on one watching you could probably get through this and still somewhat be entertained by it. So I'll say 1.5 stars, 2 stars max. But let's move along. May 11th, 2019, 4 stars. Movie is good. One time watching. Yeah, again, one time watching. I completely agree. You try to watch this a second time, you may not be able to get through it. It's just one of those things that's odd enough and strange enough that one time is the only time you're going to possibly enjoy this. Now, if you're very picky, even one time you may find too many problems with it. Boiling down the story in a nutshell, it's about a couple of American young software engineer types that go to Moscow to pitch some kind of social app. They find out soon enough that they've been beaten to the to the sale by a Swedish company or a Swedish software designer who is he's got a bad Swedish accent. He's an American actor. There are a lot of bad actors in this. As far as the accents go, especially, there are some native Russian speakers that have real Russian accents, but there are a lot of characters here that have various accents that don't match. One girl, she has a British accent that's not correct. It sounds more like an Australian accent. Another person has like I said, a Swedish accent, and it comes and goes because it's an American actor playing this person, and they're not very good at the accent. It's really off-putting if you pay attention to that. If you've got a sensitive ear, you may not be able to get through this because the accents come and go, so you really have to kind of you have to kind of forgive that a lot if you're going to get through this movie. Don't pay too much attention to the accents because they're quite bad. Now, I have a little list here. For from the top of my list, right from the beginning of this film, from the opening scene, you know, we've got a lot of camera work problems. We have camera shots that aren't very suspenseful. We have music, certainly, and a story that's suspenseful, but the camera work doesn't show that. It's a little bit too bright, particularly in scenes which should be really dark, at nighttime, underground, in places without electrical lighting. It should be very dark, and yet it's not, and it looks like almost like a film shot during the day and then filtered to look like it's at night. I'm not sure if that's what's going on, or it's just too much actual lighting was brought in even into the nighttime scenes. I don't know which. But it's definitely too bright to be suspenseful, and it's too bright to actually get me to believe in this 100%, to forget about the flaw. Like I said, the first time I saw this, I saw it on DVD release, and I didn't know anything about the film. It was like something I just picked up at the Redbox. And I watched it one time through, and it didn't, you know, the flaw of the lighting didn't strike me as being a fatal flaw at the time. But on my second watch just a couple of days ago, that was the first thing that popped out. This thing is way too bright for the stuff that's going on in dark areas. That's just off the top of my list. And then second on my list, why this would definitely not be a 3.5-star film, is there's just too much blatant product placement in this. In particular, McDonald's, but McDonald's isn't the only offender. There are certainly other products placed in this quite conspicuously. McDonald's just jumps out at you right away. It's like right in your face a bunch of times in this film. So definitely McDonald's paid for this movie. I would say they paid for a large amount of it, judging by how much their logo is in my face while I'm watching this. But let's continue on to the next review. We have 1 star from April 5, 2019. A horrible waste of time that only insults you further for even putting whatever disc you use to watch it. Yeah, if you even used a disc. I caught this on HBO just a few days ago in December of 2019. It may also be on streaming somewhere out there. I wouldn't recommend actually hunting the DVD down unless you see it in the bargain bin at Walmart, something like that. Then go ahead if it's like less than $4, because it's really not worth paying more than $2 for, in my opinion. But certainly worth watching for free one time, and crack open a beer when you start watching it, because that way it goes down a little bit easier. 2 stars max. Let's continue on. April 4th, 2019, not English. July 31st, 2018. So we've made quite a jump back in time already on the reviews, which tells me that this really isn't that relevant anymore, despite it being on HBO a couple of days ago. It can't be that relevant because we just jumped back over a year on the first page of this thing. But let me continue. 3 stars. Nothing new being presented here, with some kind of effort, with not much development to unflatten the players of the alien invasion survival flick, besides under a different take an intriguing territorial predatory display that interests towards the outcome rather than being initially thrilling as it was supposedly planned. C+. That's really bad English grammar. I'm not sure why they're so wordy or why they have such a high opinion of their really bad grammar, but I can tell that they do. They think they're a much better writer than they really are, and it shows. Let me break that down and kind of translate that English back into understandable English. They're saying that, yeah, this is an alien survival flick, but it's not exactly as thrilling as it's supposed to be, and I'll agree, it is not. The premise is actually more exciting than any thrills you'll get from it, and there are too many logical fails. You get invisible aliens hunting young people through a largely deserted Moscow area, and it should be suspenseful and it should be thrilling, but maybe only on the first watch if you don't put too much thought into it, because there's a lot of plot hole type stuff going on here. Next thing on my list, yeah, the accents come and go. Joel Kinnaman, you've seen him on the newest Netflix show Altered Carbon. That's where I've seen him most recently. He plays a Swedish software designer, and his accent comes and goes in a really bad manner. We also have moments of bad acting. You have for the most part, no-name actors and actresses. I didn't bother to read their actual names at the beginning of this as usual, as I usually do, because they're just like nobodies, and not in an offensive way. I don't mean that offensively. They're just nobodies, as in I can't recall seeing them in anything else. I don't know if they've been in anything else. I don't even care. They're just very forgettable. And so that's why I only mentioned Joel Kinnaman. But Joel Kinnaman's accent's very bad. He can't decide if he's got an American accent or a Swedish accent. And I'm pretty sure his Swedish accent is pretty awful on top of it. Let's continue on. July 11th, 2018. 1.5 stars. Might better have been called The Dumbest Hour. The movie was not totally awful, but just not very good. 5 Americans out at a club in Moscow survive an invasion by aliens that are compromised of energy and atomize people to suck their energy out. Yes, it is that ridiculous. The movie lurches from one implausible scene to the next as the 5 leads, who are all kind of annoying and develop no real chemistry as a team, then fight their way through Moscow to escape. Each scene is more eye-rolling than the next. Yes, there is a lot of eye-rolling stuff, like, for example, they come across an old Russian guy in his apartment who somehow has already shielded his entire apartment with some kind of Faraday caging, including the ceiling, the floor, the walls, etc. And it's obvious that he would have had to have had his apartment set up like that long before the alien invasion. So if the movie's trying to suggest that he did all this in just a few hours or 2 or 3 days, it's laughable. But you can kind of hand wave it away and say he was already a nutcase that was living like that before the alien invasion, and then that makes more sense. But it is very eye-rolling what happens in that location, in that apartment. One of the female characters, who shouldn't know anything about being an action hero, manages to do a lot of stuff in that apartment, enabling their escape, and it's very improbable and contrived, and it also features bad CGI, a bad CGI fire effect as the apartment burns. That's on my list too, because yeah, it's a lot of stuff that's very eye-rolling. You can see it the first time, and it moves, the pace and everything moves along fast enough where you know, it doesn't stick out to you. It just kind of happens really quick and it gets by you. But when you watch this a second time, yeah, you're rolling your eyes at how stupid a lot of it is. 3.5 stars. The Darkest Hour is a cheesy, nonsensical alien invasion flick that I had a lot of fun watching. It's like what would happen if you made a bargain bin version of Independence Day set in Moscow, stole the aliens from Final Fantasy The Spirits Within, sprinkled some Ghostbusters, old school 80s films, not the shitty 2016 film, and then mixed it with a dystopian sci-fi flick. It's an odd blend, but I found it to be a fun, guilty pleasure with plenty of over-the-top action, goofy acting, campy, dramatic moments. Yeah, it's over-the-top goofy because it's just got a lot of eye-rolling, as has been mentioned in the previous review, eye-rolling type stuff going on. It gets past you one time, but then that's it. And no, it's not funny enough to be considered it's so bad it's good. Like I said, open a beer when you're drinking this, but don't expect to laugh, just expect to get through it the first time. It is certainly too rotten to be considered like laugh out loud funny. It's not a parody in any way. You know, it could have been written like that, but no, it wasn't. Let's continue on. Wow, 4 big stars, November 28, 2017. We're back in time 2 years now. In the course of 2 pages on Rotten Reviews, so that tells you that this is becoming a very forgotten about film. I really liked this movie. There are some bad things I can say about it, see below, but overall it was a solid sci-fi action film. The concept was interesting, different, and left me wanting more. I liked the graphics, and it did not rely too much on them to tell the story. Although it seemed at first a bit of a cop-out to make the bad guys invisible, I was pleased in the end, as this helped add to the suspense without making it an overly suspenseful movie. This is like a really, really good B movie. Well, I'll disagree, and I'll say this is a pretty bad B movie, but it's a really good C- movie, definitely. And yes, I'll also agree that making the aliens largely invisible was an easy way to do this. Yes, it requires some CGI when they have to be shown doing something, but very little compared to how much you would spend if these aliens were visible the entire time. So it was very smart for them to keep them invisible. It also makes it a little bit more suspenseful, but I say a little bit because there's still a lot of logical fails in this, a bit too much for me to be like scared of anything actually going on. Yeah, the girls become action heroes when they need to be. And there are convenient devices that show up at the right times for these action hero girls to use. I'm not saying girls can't be action heroes. I'm just saying that the girls they're showing as characters in this film are like basically, party girls or college age girls that have decided to just on a lark go visit Moscow, and then they just really easily become action hero type girls. One of these girls in particular, and it's very convenient the way there are a lot of devices and things set up, and she knows exactly how to use them in just the right amount of time, etc. And it's very eye-rolling. Now, on your first viewing, you may not pick up that, but on my second viewing, it really stood out. It was the worst of the worst. 4 stars, November 18, 2017. A simply truth movie that is lost on many. Wow, I'm not sure what film they thought they were watching. Simply Truth. Okay. Wow, they're on something definitely. June 20, 2017, 1.5 stars. The Darkest Hour has great thrilling scenes. We have no doubt about that. The problem is in the script. Its screenplay is awful. This movie is full of plot holes like, in the bus, how can he destroy an alien throwing a rock against him? And in that scene when all of them fall into the river, how the survival girl teleports from there to the bus. By the way, the visual effects could have been better than they were, and the soundtrack wasn't on point too. Yeah, they've already skipped ahead to something I had on my list. At one point in the movie, all the characters, end up in a river, fleeing a exploding or overturning boat, and they end up in the river, all churned up in the river chaotically. And when they come out of the water, all of a sudden, one of the girl characters that I was speaking of before, she has ran away, like she's all the way a mile away or more than a mile away at a bus terminal where she has decided to hide inside one of the buses. Now, it doesn't make sense on a couple of different levels. One, how did she get that far away so quickly? And number two, they were all headed towards this submarine that was in the river that was within eyesight of them, certainly less than 100 yards away from them. And they all knew where the submarine was, and everybody else swam to the submarine when they went into the river. She somehow decided to just swim out of the river back onto the city streets and run through the city towards a bus depot. It doesn't make any sense on that level either. What was she doing? And of course, how did she get so far away in such a short amount of time on foot? And avoid the aliens. It doesn't make sense. They just needed her to be at that bus terminal hiding in a bus so that the plot could move forward, and then the characters could move to that bus terminal and they could rescue her and have some kind of battle with the aliens. It's very stupid and contrived, and another logical fail. And again, the first time you watch it, it moves quick enough where you may not catch that, especially if you've already had your half a beer or more. But on a second viewing, it completely fails, and it makes you want to just shut it off on your second viewing. That's one of the biggest fails in this whole film. There are other fails, like, for example, they do make it on board a Russian submarine. It's crewed by some Russian Navy personnel that have survived the alien invasion. Somehow the sailors on board the submarine know how to copy and build duplicate microwave gun weapons that one of the characters has brought on board, and they also know how to repair cell phones and get them working so that one of the American characters can talk to her grandmother or mother in the United States from Moscow. It is completely stupid, and you better be like 3 beers into your six-pack before we get to that part, or you're going to be very much wanting to shut this off because of the stupidity. But hopefully you're mostly buzzed by the time you get to that part. Let's move on here. 2.5 stars. It was okay, watchable, but not particularly exciting. Some interesting ideas, and some of the FX were good. Some were pretty awful, though. Yeah, there's a lot of copy-pasting of the effects. They had one good CGI effect that was like a towering beam of swirling energy that was said to be the aliens mining minerals out of the earth. It was particularly good CGI compared to everything else, and unfortunately, they didn't have the budget, so they just copy and pasted that same CGI effect into multiple locations and rotated it a little bit to make it look different. Very low budget, but the CGI that they did have that was good, they copy and pasted it as much as they could and reused it as much as they could. But there was in particular a kind of hokey CGI with the aliens. Some of it looked good and some of it looked cheap, and they also copy and paste and tried to reuse it as much as possible. Um, yeah, what else is on my list? Yeah, in 3 days, in a period of about 3 days, the survivors, the original characters, the kid, the young people, the young adults that were introduced to first in the movie, including two young girls from America and two software engineers from America. They, in a span of 3 days, have figured out the aliens' weaknesses and how to fight them, and so have some Russian military of some type that are holed up in the city. They've all figured this out in the span of 2 to 3 days, how to fight these aliens and what the alien weaknesses are. And yet, somehow, the rest of the world's governments and militaries couldn't figure this out and were just overrun by the aliens. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Let's continue on. Oh, a big 4 stars from February 3rd, 2017. Very thrilling with a light indicator, but its ending was too simple. Yeah, its ending was really strange. It almost had like a double ending. They got on board this submarine, this Russian submarine that was sent to, up the river into Moscow to get survivors. They make it on board, and then it kind of ends, and then it opens again with these characters on this Russian submarine, and they're out in the ocean, and they're now going on missions to attack the aliens. It's very strange, and kind of, even if you're like in full on into your six-pack, you're going to find it kind of cringe-worthy and stupid at the very end, because there's almost like a scene after the actual climax, you know, where they're going to go off on an adventure to hunt aliens. Very strange, double ending that fails. 2 stars, January 24, 2017. When the electric mist from the sky struck down. This film came 5 years ago, but I watched it now. A U.S.-Russian collaboration product that entirely takes place in Moscow. This is an alien invasion theme, but slightly different than those similar films. It never gives the reason, just the destructions like apocalypse on its way. That means it is about the survival. A group of Americans who are in Moscow for different reasons joins the hands after people started to turn into ashes. That's a lot of strange, bad grammar English to describe a synopsis. Basically, these aliens dropped out of the sky and they turn people into ash when they touch them. It's not known why the aliens are doing this or what their end game is, but it's later told to us in the movie that they are mining minerals out of the earth. And it's very strange, something else on my list. There are millions of people in the city of Moscow and around Moscow, and there's only at the maximum 1,000, 2,000 aliens that drop down out of the sky. Yet in a span of 3 days, they've entirely vaporized and killed off every single person in Moscow except for maybe a dozen people or so. I'm sorry, but even if the aliens had all the powers to turn people into ash, it would have taken them weeks, if not months, to hunt everybody down and turn them into ash, even if people didn't do a good job of hiding in basements and etc. So it's completely stupid. It's the time scale and the amount of, the time frame. It's another logical fail. There's no way Moscow would be emptied out in 3 days with just a few aliens attacking people. Doesn't make sense. It also doesn't show anybody evacuating Moscow. They didn't have the budget for any of that. This film had a very low budget. So after the characters that we see at the beginning go into hiding underneath a nightclub, they come out 3 days later and basically the entire city is deserted. And that's a function of the budget, because they couldn't show us people evacuating or being incinerated too much, because they just didn't have the budget to do that. 1.5 stars, January 13, 2017. I'll be honest, it was bad. Well, I'll be honest too. Yeah, it's 1.5 stars. I agree, and it's bad. But maybe a fun drunk watch one time. 1 star, December 12, 2016. Was expecting so much more from this one. It ultimately falls flat. The special effects are cheesy. The acting is so-so, except for Emile Hirsch. He is the only one putting any effort in. It plays out like a Sci-Fi Channel B movie, but considering it was a Hollywood-done movie, it never should have been greenlit. Yeah, I'll agree with that. It feels like a very cheap sci-fi B movie, Sci-Fi Channel B movie. But yeah, this was an actual theatrical release. I wouldn't call it big budget though, but yeah, it was an actual theatrical release at some point, and yeah, that would be very embarrassing. If I saw this in the theater, going into a theater sober, and I paid money to see it in 2011, I'd be very upset. So I'm glad that no one I knew actually heard of this before its DVD release, so that's a good thing. 5 stars, November 4th, 2016. I actually really liked this movie. I don't really see some of the other reviewers' points. I think it had a cool concept, and I've been wanting a sequel, even though I don't think that's going to happen. Oh wow, I hope it doesn't happen. You're wanting a sequel? You think this is 5 stars? You're definitely not an American. I don't know what country you live in, this Andrea B., but I'm sorry. In the US of A, this is considered a big fail. And I would think that even in somebody living in an apartment in Moscow where this film was supposedly set, I think they would consider this a bad movie too. That's just my opinion on that. And on my list, what else do I have? Yeah, we never get any motivation of the aliens, really. Why are they killing all the people? I don't know. They have no spaceships or anything, but there are these giant columns of energy, you know, mining things out of the ground, and it just shows the columns of energy reaching up into the sky. So presumably there's like some kind of invisible spacecraft up in the sky or something, but the movie never tells us that or gives us a hint of that. It's just kind of a logical fail. Let's see. Yes, in a few minutes. Okay, this old man, this old Russian guy in an apartment that's inside this Faraday cage, he happened to have constructed a microwave gun that can fight the aliens. He's figured this all out in less than 3 days. Okay, fine. One of the Americans, he takes this microwave gun with him when they move on from the apartment towards the submarine. Now, when they get to the submarine, they take this homemade microwave gun on the submarine, and somehow, like I said before, in just a few minutes, the crew of the Russian submarine has already copied the weapon 3 or 4 times and outfitted people with it. Yeah, that's really believable. I'm sure they're experts in building these homemade microwave guns, rifles, and I'm sure that they just have all those spare parts laying around too. It's very convenient. Half a star, July 17, 2016. We'll have an alien invasion in Russia. Wow, so there'll be crazy badass Russians fighting them and being crazy badass Russians. No, whiny privileged American exchange students because America. So why set it in Russia? Yeah, it's kind of weird. It's set in Russia, but it didn't need to be set in Russia. It's kind of weird like that, and its weirdness is one of the reasons I say it's worth watching this once if you've already started drinking, because it's just set in a weird place for no reason, and you have to kind of watch it to find out why. But you're never given a reason why. It's just there to be different, I guess. Now, there's some crazy Russians, definitely. Some of them are Russian actors, I suppose. They're Russian military that have, like, become survivors in the city of Moscow, and they're kind of goofy characters, and they have horses that they ride that they've put electronic shielding on the horses so they can fight the aliens, and it's very strange and comic booky, and it doesn't quite fit in with a lot of stuff that happens before in the movie. It kind of turns a serious suspense type movie into a comic book movie at points. And it's just weird enough to keep you watching, but there's no logic behind this at all, like why you would choose to set a film in Moscow and do all this weird stuff. I don't know, maybe because it's a joint collaboration and the production team was from Moscow or something. I don't know. There must be a story there, but it's just weird enough to keep you watching, assuming that you're in a good mood and you've already started on a beer. But let's move on. January 14th, 2016, 4 stars. Good movie, but it has the same old-fashioned alien storyline, but in a different context. Yeah, it's different, all right. About 1.5 stars worth of different. 3.5 stars, December 26, 2015. We're quite a ways back in time now. This is one but a shitty movie to enjoy, but come on, it can't be 12%. It most definitely can't be Batman and Robin bad. Just come on. It is far more exciting than I expected, and I didn't want to miss this one. Score 6.5 out of 10. You're going to bring up Batman and Robin. Well, Batman and Robin, if you're a beer or two in, it's quite a comedy. It's laugh out loud funny. This, no, not really. This one should be, but no. It's just weird, and you're not going to laugh out loud. You might find it entertaining enough to finish, being buzzed, but you're not going to get a lot of laughs, unfortunately. It just wasn't written in that way. They weren't trying to make this funny at all. There's no attempt at humor here. It's all supposed to be taken completely seriously. September 6, 2015, 1 star, not English. August 20, 2015, 2 stars. Promising film with an interesting premise. Taxed by an unwanted, unconvincing, and uninteresting ending. Yeah, the ending is really boring. They just whoever wrote this couldn't figure out what to do after they made it to the submarine, so they just kind of put another little bullshit ending scene on that where they're going to decide to go off and fight aliens using the submarine. Okay, whatever. If you got to that point, hopefully you finished all 6 of your beers, or if you're on a 12-pack, you're into number 8. Because, yeah, they just couldn't figure out what to do at the end of this. They just kind of needed to end it because the running time had expired. That's the way this feels very much. August 5, 2015, 2 stars. It's a B movie with a modest budget. A bunch of nearly invisible aliens have come to steal our minerals for whatever reason. The visual effects are creative, but they can get somewhat repetitive. Yeah, they copy and paste a lot of the effects. The actors do well with the material they have, which I found to be surprisingly believable. Unlike most movies in this genre, the characters are surprisingly cooperative. There is no time for remorse when a character dies, but a good number of leads die in the film. I guess the biggest missed opportunity, well, yeah, it's not a film where there's a lot of bickering and fighting and arguing amongst the main characters. I'm not sure if that would have made this better or not, but they cooperate very easily in this film, so that's kind of believable. It's just a mix, If you threw 5 or 6 random people together, you may come up with a group that just cooperates really well, or you may not. Either way, it's believable, so that wasn't an off-putting flaw in it for me. But yeah, we've seen plenty of films where if they had 5 or 6 of these young people together, 2 or 3 would die just by arguing against the other ones and not sticking with the plan. The actual Swedish software engineer, he does actually decide not to stick to the plan, and the aliens kill him off pretty quick. But that's about it. Everybody else pretty much cooperates. And, there's another actress I've seen in this. I can't recall her name either. I saw her again in the Netflix series Jessica Jones. So right off the bat, you have 2 actors in this that are in other Netflix productions. So they're also probably amenable to doing B and C movies like this. So that's where I've seen those 2 actors before, and I have never seen any of the other actors any other place, so I'm going to say that their salaries were very low on this film, sticking with the low budget. April 20, 2015, 1.5 stars. One of those brain-numbingly stupid movies that has a lot of big bangs and very little else. There's not a lot of the big bangs. They copy and paste all the effects that do look decent. So after you've seen these effects once or twice, it's just a repeat. March 21, 2015, 2.5 stars. This movie reminds me a lot of Skyline in that it's primarily concerned with visual effects over actual story. The movie tells about an alien invasion by invisible beings who are electromagnetic in nature. That sounds good, and some of the ideas of how the monsters are here are unique to more traditional aliens, are interesting, but it never really goes far enough, and the ideas come across as half-baked. I also got the impression that the story and characters were put in as an afterthought. Yeah, 100% I agree with this one. Very half-baked. It's like they had a premise, but they didn't have the budget to carry it all out. And it is like they put the characters in after everything else and tried to make them go towards an ending, and then they couldn't figure out how exactly the ending was supposed to go, so they kind of just ended it. Yes, I agree 100%, but not the 2.5 stars. I say 1.5 to 2 maximum, so you're being a little too generous there. February 17, 2015. The premise for this sci-fi horror is a pretty good one, and the film starts off well, but the increasingly silly survival plot and the lame characters that are hard to take serious in this situation ruin it all. I'll agree with that too. I can agree with that one as well. Yeah, I think I've mentioned everything that was on my list, or other reviewers have brought these things up, but let's continue on to finish this page out at least. 1 star, January 26, 2015. Complicated yet idiotic plot, low budget, yes. 1 star, January 25, 2015. Some of the reviews on here are clearly from people of most forgiving and generous dispositions. It's like a really, really good school drama project. Yeah, I can agree with that, and I'll also agree that, yeah, a lot of these 5 and 4 and 3.5 star reviewers, I don't know what they're thinking. Like, these are reviewers that have only ever watched films that come out of the Walmart discount bin. They've never been anywhere else to see a film. Then I could agree with that. Or they live in foreign countries where those are the only movies that they're exposed to, so this is actually pretty good. And the other reviewer compared this to Skyline. Skyline definitely had a bigger budget. I'm not saying it was a whole lot better, but it had a much bigger budget. You could tell this was a lower budget. 3 stars, November 20, 2014. I actually enjoyed this movie. It may be formulaic, but it does introduce some new ideas into a tired genre. Yeah, it is tired, isn't it? A throwback to the days when you didn't really see the aliens, with brief glimpses, and making them invisible to the human eye at least makes it interesting. Another refreshing thing was it wasn't set in the USA. Aliens seem only to have an atlas containing the continent of North America, but recently we've had 2 movies where the alien invasion happens elsewhere on this planet of ours. Yeah, I'll agree in one regard with this reviewer. If this same exact story were set in New York City, it wouldn't even be worth sitting through one time, because it would be very boring right from the beginning, very boring and tired. But since this is set in Moscow, we haven't seen a movie set in this area before. And I'm not sure all of it was filmed there, but that's where it's portrayed to be. It's interesting enough to keep watching as long as you've got a buzz on, definitely. And that's just largely because we haven't seen an alien invasion movie set in Russia with Americans along for the ride, and a whole lot of people along for the ride with bad accents on top of it. 12% on the tomato meter, I think that's 100% fair. 25% on the audience score, I think that's fair. Even if it dropped to 12% on the audience score, it would be fair. But again, if you're buzzed going into this, it might be worth watching just that one time. On your second viewing, though, I doubt you'll get 20 minutes into it, if that, maybe not even 10 minutes into it. So in any case, I'm going to call this one, and see you on the next episode of Rotten Reviews.